Does anyone have anything they would like to discuss?
So now we're up to open floor.
Oh,
So
okay.
you're the other thing we'd like to discuss. So this is John Mark Hogg.
Hi, everybody.
And
I've met everybody. I think I've met everybody in here.
okay, good. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if I needed to.
Brittany, I've met before. Is it Brittany?
Dornice?
Dornice.
Yep.
Dornice,
Yep,
I've met
hi.
before.
Awesome. Yay. So we talked about the differences between Democrats and Republicans on Monday, I think it was, and so John Mark Hogg is our Democratic candidate, and running for the U.S. representative. So he'd be working in Washington in Washington representing our part of Texas. So I will let John Mark.
Okay. Talk about. Well, it's nice to meet everybody. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Amy and I have been good friends for a number of years, and Greg, and I've known about the clubhouse a lot over a number of years, but I've never actually been in it until this morning. So I was glad to get the invite and come here. Kind of explaining a little bit about what a representative does is, of course, there's the United States Congress, which is for the country as a whole. We're not in Austin, we'll be in Washington. And the state is divided up into a number of districts, and you represent about 800,000 people in each of those districts. And so, for our district, it goes from Midland, Odessa, all the way over to Granbury, and almost to Fort Worth. It goes almost to Lubbock, up at Lamesa, and then all the way down to Junction. So it's 29 counties. It's about it's not a little over, but a fair bit over 28,000 square miles of territory. About 800,000 people live in that area. Most of them are living in Midland and Odessa, and here in San Angelo are the three biggest places, biggest cities in the district. What you do as a representative is, of course, you essentially move to Washington at least while the Congress is in session, and you're there working. There's 435 congressmen from across the United States that meet in Washington and set the budget, how the federal government spends its money, how money that might go to programs like this would be spent. And also passing other laws and things that we need for the country as a whole, and it works together with the state government, which is in Austin, which you probably discussed. I assume you'll discuss some of that as well, but it's separate. And then you also look out for the interests of people, such as if the clubhouse here had a problem with something with some federal agency that it needed to work with and was having trouble with it. Amy or Greg might call my office and say, hey, we need some help with this, and I would have staff that would work with them to resolve that problem, because sometimes government doesn't move very quick sometimes, and so there's things like that. It's just serving your constituents, serving the people that you represent. I decided to get into this election, into this race, just because there's just been so much anger and hate and venom spewed out in our politics these days. We get caught up talking about things that, basically Washington politicians want to talk about, and not about the things that are important right here at home. And so what I wanted to do was get into this to try to improve that, to talk about things that are more important for things here at home, such as problems with affordable health care. We have a crisis in rural health care and mental health services in this district. It's almost impossible to get doctors and psychiatrists and things of that nature to get mental health services here in the district. That's one of those things that I would like to be working on, and to just try to refocus that to, we're talking about, addressing issues for common folk and common people, and trying to bring some common decency back, where we're having civil conversations and not insulting each other and calling each other names and those sorts of things, and focusing on the real issues that matter to us every day. So we got into this last August. We had the primary election. I don't know if y'all discussed that or not. The process is each party has a primary, and so where candidates in that party can decide to see can vie to see who's going to get to be the candidate. And so I was unopposed in my primary. On the Republican side, they had about 10 that were trying on the Republican side. And so those were decided back in March. And so now we're up to the general election, which is just around the corner in about 18 days, I think, from today. So that the election will be on November 3rd is when that is. And so, I'm just here, really fascinated to hear what's going on with you guys, answer any questions that you may have. We can talk about issues if you want. We can talk about just politics in general. We can talk about voting and elections. But, the most important thing is not necessarily who you decide. I mean, it is important who you decide to vote for, but it is that you vote. It's a very important part of the process, and it's one of the few ways that we as citizens can have an impact on, what kind of programs are going to be happening, what sort of public assistance we're going to be keeping the Social Security going, supporting programs that help places like this Angelo Clubhouse, and then there's all sorts of other issues, national defense and those things, but focusing just on what we need here in the district, would be healthcare, public education issues, and then housing and infrastructure, things like that. So, but I'd be happy to talk about all that. I just didn't know how general you want or specific you want to get.
I had a question that I think would be interesting that I don't think I've brought up to them yet. But so John Mark also, years ago, served as kind of an interim mayor. It's called Mayor Pro Tem. So when the mayor, we didn't have a mayor for a little bit, and he was on the city council. So he got to serve as the mayor for a while until we had an election. Mm-hmm. And so I guess could you talk about the importance of, it's a little bit off topic, but of voting locally versus voting for a national election?
Sure. I would say voting locally is probably more important, than voting nationally. Particularly when you get, and there aren't any of these on the ballot in November here. We usually vote on those in May. For city council, for school board, just to give you a little pat there.
Thank you.
Those in particular, and also the county, or county commissioners court, things of that nature. Those are much more important, and even county sheriff, they're much more important, in my opinion, than voting for Congress, because these officials, people like Amy and those that are serving on these local boards or city councils, what they do has a direct impact on your life every day. You're talking about things like, someone coming to pick up the trash, keeping the water going. I've said for years that the guys that maintain the water and sewer systems in the city are the most important people in the city, because without those, the city would shut down. Police and fire are important too, don't get me wrong, but if you didn't have somebody take care of the sewage and the water and the trash, it'd get really nasty around here really fast, really fast. So there's, those are very important. That's one of the things I really enjoy, and I encourage everybody that's interested to get involved in local city government or politics, because you learn so much about what's going on in your city, and you're really able to contribute. I can sit here today, and if we go around the city, I can say I was on city council when we approved that project, and look at this, and those sorts of things. So it's really, really important. So we kind of tend to forget about those around here. We get so focused on who's going to be president. Who's going to be president doesn't impact you nearly as much as who's going to be your city council member, who's going to be on your school board, deciding things about your local schools and for the kids there. So don't forget about those either. Yeah.
But we're really lucky that we have local people running, not just so we can meet them, but also because, when hopefully John Mark gets to Washington, we'll have somebody that his wife still works at the high school here, and his kids grew up here. And so if you call and say you're from San Angelo, he and his staff would be like, oh, well, they're from the city where I'm from. Yeah. So, not that you wouldn't care about Midland, but
Yeah, that's right.
So, but anyway, so I just wanted to just point that out.
Sure.
Does anybody?
John, can you tell everybody a little bit about your experience?
Sure. It's a kind of a long story. I don't know how much you want to go into, but basically, my parents were Baptist missionaries, and so we grew up in Trinidad and Tobago when I was a kid, which is down in the Caribbean islands, down right off the coast of Venezuela. And then we ultimately ended up in El Paso, where I finished high school, and then we went to Baylor University, graduated there, married a girl from San Angelo named Claire Hirschfeld. So, and then we went to law school at St. Mary's Law School in San Antonio. Graduated there, had a job waiting for me here in 1992 when I graduated. I've been practicing law here and all over this area for the last 28 years. My wife is the librarian at Central High School. My kids are graduated from Central, went all the way through San Angelo schools, graduated. They've gone on and doing great things. And I also served on the San Angelo City Council, and I've been on lots of other boards for the city, Charter Review Commission, and that's the thing. Once you serve on City Council, they always come back to you and ask you to serve on some other commission too, which is really good. I'm on the Tax Increment Reinvestment Board for the city. I'm on the Parks and Recreation Board, and just doing all those sorts of things and just being involved in the community all around. One thing in this setting, I think, I don't know if I should share it or not, but and one thing that really interests me about the work you guys are doing here is, because I suffer from depression myself and have been treating for it for years, and have anxiety and all those things, and it hit at a really hard time, in middle age and stuff. And so I have chronic depression that I treat on, still take medication on and do all day. And it's just amazing to me how we don't really recognize that in the services that we have, and we still try to hide it and make it sort of something that's shameful for a lot of people. And I just wanted to share that because when you get in the throes of that and you realize how debilitating it can be, I had some of those experiences myself. So not that that's, I don't know what anyone else is here for, but that was my experience, and I know that you can deal with it, and it's just something that's important to me that I try to talk about it as much as I can whenever it's appropriate, just because I think it's important that we keep talking about those things.
Thank you for sharing that. 'Cause
Sure.
I think everybody in this room can relate to that.
Yeah. I mean, and you hear from a lot of people, and you'll hear from a lot of people in the community, well, just get up and go to work or do whatever, and until you've experienced it, you really don't know what it's really like. So I admire everyone here for working hard and being a part of it.
Ruben actually had a question.
Okay.
So I thought I would
Hi, Ruben.
chime in.
Yeah, the U.S. federal deficit is, I guess, projected to reach $3.3 trillion this year.
Yep.
And in order for us to get that under control, we have to reduce domestic spending. How do you feel about that, and what programs would you be willing to reduce? Things like Medicaid, Medicare, etc.
Well, I'm not in favor of reducing those programs. The actual, what you have, the thing that you have with the deficit and why it's gotten so huge right now is, mistakes that were made during the last 3 to 4 years of the huge tax cuts that we got that cut so much from the wealthy. I mean, I don't know about you, my taxes went up after the tax cuts, and I think a lot of people's did. And most of that tax cut benefit went for the wealthy, and that was a huge mistake because you don't do deficit spending while your economy is growing in a booming economy. You save the deficit spending for when things are bad, like they are right now with COVID. So I think that was a mistake. That's all water under the bridge now. We still have to deal with it. The only way you can reasonably attack the deficit is you're going to have to increase revenue coming into the federal government, and you're going to have to reduce spending at some levels. I think we have overspent on a lot of issues that I think, a good example to me is the border wall is something that we shouldn't be spending money on. And I think there's a lot of things. I'm not in favor of cutting that on Medicare and Medicaid, and those especially are dedicated funds. They're really not, we call them entitlements, but a lot of times the word entitlement gets used in a negative way. It's like it's just somebody who's just taking money from you. What all an entitlement really means in a budget sense is it's money that the Congress doesn't really have discretion on allocating. For example, the interest we pay on the national debt is an entitlement in a budget sense because we can't control it. We have to pay for it. The same goes for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Those are all set up on formulas. The money that gets spent on those is set up by that formula. The idea of cutting payroll taxes, things like that would kill Social Security, it will kill Medicare. I'm not in favor of balancing the budget on the backs of poor people. So I would say I think there are programs that you can look at to cut, but that's where the rubber meets the road and it becomes very difficult because, to me, I think there's some security issues. I think the border wall is one thing and allocating things of that nature. I also think we still have some gross over, and we need to have a strong military, but I think there are some things and expenditures in there that we need to go back and do because what I think has happened is not necessarily that we have spent the money that the military wants us to spend or where the military wants us to spend it, but just congressmen that want to look good, so they're giving lots of money to the military that may not be being spent appropriately for what we need right now. So I think those are things that need to be talked about. So I can't sit here and tell you I've cut this program or cut that program because I don't have enough information right now to be able to make that decision. But anyway.
Thank you.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Or did I ramble?
No, it's hard.
Yes, it very is.
It's
Very hard.
It's very difficult, but I just think that we need to get this under control.
Yeah, I agree completely.
And I realize but some of what you've answered are things that I think I would approve.
Yeah.
The border wall, not funding as much for defense, having so many people who are zillionaires pay nothing in taxes.
Yep.
Or their corporations pay nothing in taxes.
Yep.
Fixing that, I think, would go a long way
Well,
to reducing
yeah.
our deficit.
I think before we start cutting budgets on things like social programs and domestic spending, I think we need to look at revenue first, because it's just like anything else. You can't, your business can't grow unless you're also bringing money in and cutting. If all you're doing is cutting, your business is not going to be doing well, and you're not going to be doing well. You have to. I mean, you live on whatever income you have. If you have more income, you've got more to do with, and you can also manage your finances better than if all you're doing all the time is just still having to cut because the income is never going up or it's going down. So a lot of people only want to talk about cuts. They don't want to talk about revenue. So
I have a question.
sure.
Is it really true that there's actually someone in Washington or at the White House that they're basically trying to take away SSI and Medicaid?
Well, it depends on how you mean by true. It is true that the president had initiated a payroll tax holiday, I guess, for lack of a better word. He suspended it through the end of the year. Payroll tax is what pays for Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. If you did away with the payroll tax completely, you would either have to come up with some other source of funding or it would go away. So And one of his proposals is that if he's reelected, he wants to do away with the payroll tax completely. But at the same time, he also says he wants to maintain Social Security and Medicare, but he doesn't have any proposal about how you would pay for it if you did away with the payroll tax. So essentially what that does is if you take it away, there's no funding, because Social Security is not paid for out of your income taxes or Medicare. It's all paid, every paycheck that you work, there's a tax that comes out called FICA, and that's what's used to invest, that the government uses for its Social Security fund and Medicare to pay for that. And that's why I mean by it's not a discretionary amount that Congress can even do anything with. The only thing Congress can do is set the payroll tax, but the formula about how the money is done and what your Social Security benefits would be, or Medicare, is done basically through the CMS and through a formula. So if no one has seriously introduced a bill to do away with the payroll tax, in fact, this holiday that the president did at the end of the year on the payroll tax, it doesn't do away with the tax, it just means you don't have to pay it right now. So lo and behold, what will happen in January is, unless something else is done, the people that didn't have to pay that payroll tax will have to pay the payroll tax. It'll have to come out of your check. So there's a possibility that a lot of people will be very surprised when their paycheck is a lot less in January if they have to go back and catch that up. Now, I kind of suspect that Congress might do something about that so that people don't have to have that happen with the pandemic, but I don't know what's going to happen with it right now.
Or come out of your tax refund.
So, yes, it has, there are people in, I can't say there's somebody serious in the White House right now trying to do that. I can say there are people in Washington that would love to do that and would love to do away with Social Security and Medicare, and that the president has in the past said he wants to do that, and then he goes back and says, "Oh no, I never said that." So it depends on who you ask, I suppose. But so, there's not any danger that that's going to happen in the near future, and I really doubt that will happen.
And if I could interject with, Image and Mark did not participate in that payroll tax for.
Okay.
We all checked.
That is not good for our employees, nor good for the organization, so don't worry about
Yeah.
anything happening.
Yeah, we were all like, we're gonna just look at that and see what happens.
Well,
So
you
thank
can always
for
call and
that.
talk to me about it. Y'all can always call
I
and
would
talk.
have if we did.
Okay.
And I don't know how many employers did, but
I've never heard about it.
so it may be nothing, but it's just that's the status of it, as far as I know.
A question from a staff member who wasn't able to work today. She was curious when we were talking about how you're an attorney here in town. She was curious to know how, if you got elected, how you would be, would you have to give up part of your job, or how does that work?
I would not be practicing law. I mean, I might still have some association with the firm just because I've been with them so long, but I would be full-time working as a representative. You get paid a full-time salary to serve as a representative, and so I would keep my house here and probably have to rent an apartment or something in Washington while I was there, and you basically just spend your life flying back and forth all the time.
I will let her know. Thank you.
So, yep.
What is your overall look at the BL,
BLM.
BL,
BLM.
Black
Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Yes, what do you think of that?
I think that is, I'm surprised it took this long for it to be taken that seriously. To me, the Black Lives Matter movement is not some radical movement. It's a civil rights movement, just like we've had civil rights movements in this country since before slavery was done away with. I think it's an issue about justice, and it's an issue about, if you want to talk about law and order, it's about stopping law enforcement from killing people in the streets, which would be lawless too. And it's talking about addressing those issues. It's a lot big. Law enforcement is one part of it, but it's a much bigger issue than that, and it's essentially about saying, that we have to do something to address that problem. And, you know, I support the movement. I went and participated in a march in Odessa after the George Floyd murder. And, you know, it's largely peaceful as far as demonstrations goes. What the problem that I think we've begun to have across the country is counter-protesters and some white supremacist groups that have raised their heads, and I think that's where a lot of the violence, that's what you tend to see where the violence is coming from those. So, I represent law enforcement officers. I represent police departments and cities and counties all over the district, so I understand the unique challenges that they face, and I'm a big supporter of the police, but we've got to do something about, you know, this issue. There shouldn't be. You just have to look at the numbers and you can see the disparate treatment that police have with someone who looks like me as opposed to someone who's black or Hispanic. So how we do that, I'm not exactly sure, but you know, we've got to address it.
Like this thing with Vanessa, the one from Fort Hood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was talked about, and now it's all over. Nobody has said anything about it anymore. Yeah. It's under the rug. What do you think about the military doing that to enforce that in the military, that they are not allowed to abuse their military people?
Well, that's already the law in the military. That commander, there were lots of problems at Fort Hood. I mean, we had so many issues with Fort Hood right then and there. So I think Congress needs to be taking a look, and I hope the Armed Services Committee is taking a look at what's going on in those military installations and some of the cultural issues. There are cultural issues in the military that we've allowed to get out of control as far as abuse and things of that nature. I don't know the details of what happened in that, and I know there's still an investigation ongoing into it, so it needs to come out in the open, it needs to be done publicly.
I have another question. I'm under the understanding that the budget's not really balanced or something like that.
Yeah, it's not.
Is that impossible to balance it?
It's not impossible. It's very difficult. It will take a long time. Deficit spending is what we were talking about with Reuben. And it has been balanced and close to balanced several times in recent history in the last 50 years. You know, of course, where you typically run up a big deficit or debt is with big events. You know, we ran up a huge one during World War II, for example. We now have the highest deficit we've had since World War II. During the Clinton administration, I was talking with former Congressman Stenholm, who was a real budget hawk when he was in Congress, and I asked him who he liked working with as president from all his 30-something year career in Congress. And he said, Clinton, as far as the budget goes, because they were really able to get the budget worked down during that time. During the Obama administration, they were working really good at getting the deficit down. Of course, now it's exploded again. And it exploded under George W. Bush, exploded under Trump. What we have to get into is this. We have to get into some measure of control. A lot of people favor a balanced budget amendment. In Texas, you have to have a balanced budget. You can't have public debt the way that they do in Washington. And there's a lot of good arguments to make for that. On the flip side, the ability to do deficit spending is what enables us to fund things like the assistance that we've had during the pandemic. So, I think there needs to be a way that when we have emergency crises, or like a war or a national defense issue, that we can do that. But we have to get that under control. The idea that you can just run amok on debt is just anathema to me. But have to get that under control. There have been times, it can be done. It's just whether we're willing to do it or not.
If and when you do get to go to Washington, which hopefully, what do you think you could do to break the stigmata of mental health problems here in the United States? Why, what is the problem that people have not being able to be open to get help, to be able to reach out to.
Well, the first thing I think, as far as breaking the stigma, is doing sort of what I just did here, which is you have to stand up and say it. And you have to have people that are in positions of influence say, I've experienced that, or my family has, and how important it is. The thing that we really have to do, more importantly, I think, is we have to have more services available in areas like San Angelo and in District 11, because it is, and I know, because when I was trying to find help, and trying to be able to talk to a psychiatrist, there's almost none of them here. And it's not just San Angelo, it's Midland and Odessa as well. One of the things that we need to do is being able to have services available. Telehealth, telemedicine, using technology is one of those ways that I think we might could help with that in some ways. But as far as raising the awareness of it, how you raise the awareness of it is you just talk about it all the time. I mean, that's just how you do it. And you start working on legislation to make those kind of services available for everybody. The amount of economic, if you really want to put it down in terms of money, which is what everybody in America seems to understand, economics is the number of manpower, the hours that you could be working and making money, contributing to the economy, are lost because of mental health. The hours that you're doing and the revenue and the things that you could be achieving because of mental illness. You're either having to take time off, or if you're in a really bad situation, you may not be able to work at all. Those sorts of things. Those are the kind of things we need to be addressing, and things like this to help people get through those times and get back to work. The biggest problem is getting people back to work. It's always been our problem.
Vice President Biden has said that he wants to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Mm-hmm. Would that affect people with Medicare, Medicaid, or would that help us raise a little bit on our income?
Well, I think you would. $15 an hour is still not much. And it all depends on how that impacts you, particularly for Medicaid, and whether you're eligible for it. It's going to depend a lot on who the individual is. If you're a single person, you might not be eligible for Medicaid. I'm not sure what the exact income requirements are for that right now, but but if you got a family of 3 or 4 that you're trying to support on something like that, then that may not impact it that much. What I would like to see is, of course, we need to expand Medicaid, and the way to expand that has been in the hands of the state for a long time, and the state has refused to do it, which would basically increase the number of people that are eligible for Medicaid under the service. The whole idea was to get the number of uninsured down. I think we do need to be looking at some sort of mechanisms of public option or something, so that we can have everybody that's uninsured be able to get insurance to the extent that they can. I don't think the $15 an hour wage by itself will necessarily affect the Medicaid eligibility. I think what it will affect is how much income you're making, and do you still qualify for Medicaid. And I can't remember do you know the number, what the income amount is? I can't remember. Qualify for Medicaid. It's very low. It's less than $30,000 a year. It's like 20 or 25, something like that.
Every time I look at those numbers, I'm always shocked by how low.
Yeah. Well, if you make a person makes $15 an hour, and they work 40 hours a week for the whole year, they're still making less than $30,000 in a year. And then that's just for one person. And then if you add a family, you know, a wife, children, or a husband, it just goes down considerably. It's not much to live on.
Medicare, Medicaid, they don't cover, like, they only cover so much of dental.
Yeah.
Is there any way that we can raise that up a little bit? Because, you know, if you have no teeth, you can't eat.
Yeah.
You know, you know, there's
Yeah.
certain things, if you don't look well, you can't get a good job because they look at your appearance first of all.
Yeah, and that's the problem, you know, you have that problem also with private insurance. Private insurance, usually dental is not covered with private insurance, and you have to usually buy it separately if you're with your employer. At least that's how it is with my employer. And I have never even thought about whether Medicare covers dental or not up until this point, so I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something I'd like to look into.
Well, Medicaid typically doesn't pay for dental.
Yeah.
Unless it's for kids.
Yep.
So that's always been a great challenge for us.
Yeah, and we don't know what those bills could be like. Those are very big.
I know.
I haven't gone to the dentist lately, so.
Well, and that's why, and I've seen that sometimes even in my own family of, you don't take your kids to the dentist for that very reason. So it gets really bad, and then it costs even more.
I'm afraid I got another question.
Don't be afraid.
Hold on one second, Jack is gonna ask a question and then you can, is that okay? Right, thank you, sir.
So, on the $15 an hour deal, I've been concerned and it's been kind of hard for me to digest the $15 an hour because people thinking that they deserve the $15 an hour because McDonald's and all that went on strike because they wanted to get paid $15 an hour. And the concern is if you were to do $15 an hour, there's some businesses that would maybe go out of business because they would have to go up on their prices on the food that they sell at the restaurants. And then the danger is maybe the restaurant going out of business because I work at Waterbury, and I'm afraid that Waterbury will go out of business because if they got paid $15 an hour, then that would be a concern. So is there any plan to do $15 an hour so that
Well, it's been
business won't go out of business?
It's been discussed. The $15 an hour increasing overtime, increasing minimum wage is something that's been discussed for a long time. One of the things, the last reports of studies I've seen, because that's always been a concern, is if you raise the minimum wage and you raise the cost to the business to pay labor, then is it profitable for the business to continue? Most studies that I have seen over the years indicate that they have not been able to find a connection between an increase in minimal increases in the minimum wage and business closures. And it's the same thing, we've always been, employers want cheap labor. You have to pay for it. And the idea is, well, and I have a lot of friends that even argue, well, we shouldn't even have any minimum wage because, it should just be up to the employee. But the bargaining position between the two is so different, to me. But I haven't seen any indication. I think that is a concern, but I think what we've seen with past increases, because it was at $5.25 an hour, and then a number of years ago, we increased it to $7.25 an hour, and there's the same issues there, and I'm not aware of. Now, there may be a business somewhere that has happened to, but I'm not aware of any businesses, any reports that indicate that there's this issue with closures because the minimum wage has increased. In fact, a lot of what that does is increases the amount of work, for people to do. But that's a very philosophical difference of opinion that a lot of people have on that. But I haven't seen any hard evidence that indicates businesses close if you raise the minimum wage.
Ruben, did you have a question as well?
Yes. People on, who receive disability benefits, payments, they usually have to demonstrate, usually every 2 years, that they're still disabled.
Yep.
A year ago, November, the Trump administration proposed that the criteria for being disabled, he was gonna shrink that greatly.
Yep.
And that the time to be re-qualified would also be shrunk.
Yep.
I think that proposal got put on hold because of COVID-19, but I'd like to know if you know any more about that at this time, and what are your views on that?
I don't know any more about that other than, they talked about doing it. I think you would need to be very careful in doing that. The whole idea, and that's been the process through the Trump administration. They have significant cuts to Medicare planned right now. That if they go into effect, are going to significantly impact rural hospitals and rural health care to tunes of tens of hundreds of millions of dollars. I think the same thing. I understand if there's a medical basis for reevaluating a disability, some are temporary, some may not be, then I think, we need to be very careful about before we go start extending those, because people have been relying upon it for so many years. I haven't looked at whatever the specific proposals were that they were proposing. My tendency would be I would probably be against those. But I'd have to sit down and look at them in particular before, if I came to a vote or anything of that nature. But a lot of what President Trump will try to do is not necessarily through Congress, but through regulation and changing the standards of the agencies. So Congress needs to have a more involved role in going back and looking at those and overruling those if they're not to the benefit of the people. Yep. Good questions.
There are some
Yeah.
questions you got.
Y'all are giving me questions that are tougher than they asked the debate the other
Oh,
night.
God.
Like real questions.
I know, it's exciting to hear the concerns.
I have one more question. Okay, I feel like people are not taking depression serious enough.
You're right.
What do you think about expanding education? Like you said earlier before, we don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough psychiatrists. What do you think about expanding our education a little bit more to be able to get more doctors, more psychiatrists, more help you out there?
Yeah. Well, there are programs, and that's one of the difficulties that we have out here is recruiting doctors and keeping them here. We've tried for years to have programs to encourage doctors to move to areas where there's low population density, or rural areas, that sort of thing, or places like San Angelo where there are not as many of those service providers around. But those have all been kind of met with mixed reviews. I'd be interested I'm interested in doing something about that, but I think what you have to do with that is you have to grow your own, so to speak. Us getting a doctor from some kid that grew up in Dallas who gets a scholarship in Greece to come here for a few years doesn't mean he's going to stay here. You have better success. I think we have better success with growing kids from San Angelo and Midland and Odessa and Brownwood and those places, and encouraging them through the system to be able to come back. Now, problem is, quite frankly, there's just more money and a lot more exciting things to do in Dallas than there are in San Angelo. So that's just one of the drawbacks with it, which is one of the things that I think, one good thing that has come out of COVID is we've learned how much we can do with telemedicine. And so I think that's one of the quick solutions, I think, for us to be able to get the providers, because most of the time, it depends on what your treatment is, but if particularly going to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, you can do a lot of that stuff online. You don't necessarily have to be in person, or you maybe have to do it in person once in a while, but not, every month. So I think there are some solutions to that we can do, because you can access a whole world of providers out there that you used to could not. But it's not a perfect solution. We still need more practitioners here in town, because when people are in acute distress, you need somebody in the location to deal with it. So we have to do that, but I think we have to look long-term to do that and start trying to build something out. So.
What do you think about the campaign on basically going to people and making fun of people and stuff like that? I grew up in the 70s, and I was actually born and raised in Alpine, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And so, is there anything that you actually do for the campaign?
For the bullying, like at schools and things like the kids? Oh, yeah. Name me one kid who doesn't feel like they've been bullied. Yeah, everybody's experienced it. Jeez, that's a tough question. What do you do about bullying? Kids are mean to each other. I mean, they just are, and maybe they learn it because adults are mean to each other. Maybe that's part of the problem. I don't know. I just don't know how we address that as a government. I think what we can be doing is, some of the things that even the First Lady's been promoting is anti-bullying campaigns and things of that nature, and treating each other with respect. But that's also part of it is, particularly if you've got a mental illness as a kid, and you're more subject to it.
Yes.
If that's that kind of what you're talking about more.
Yes. Well, it happened to a cousin that's paralyzed from the waist down because he had an accident in Angelo, Texas.
Yeah.
He basically lives in Dallas, Texas right now with his brother Harvey Hogg in Dallas, Texas. And so that's always been a concern, because I was picked on all the time and I was called names, so,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I wondered about that.
Those are not any things you can wave a magic wand and fix, I'm afraid. The only way you can deal with those sorts of things is through over time, and a lot of it depends on the parents, it depends on the family, and that sort of thing too. I wish I could say there's something that you could do in a law to make that not happen. But what we do need to do is we do need to enforce the law, particularly in public school settings and in places where we have to address it. And sometimes we have not done a very good job of that particularly in public schools, of stopping harassment, stopping the bullying, and things of that nature. Everybody needs to have a safe environment in which to learn and go to school and those sorts of things. So we've not done a very good job with that over the years. Yes?
I'm curious if there's anything in the works about getting more mental health help in the schools.
That may be more a school board member issue, but
I mean, if
We
there
need
is,
funding for that.
yeah. Well, yeah. Now you're gonna get me in trouble.
I'm
but,
sorry.
it's
Yeah.
Amy, I got her.
But that's that is one of those things. Right now we've got Department of Education grants going for a lot of things that don't help and things of that nature. I mean that something like that would be something that I could certainly see an education grant from the Federal Department of Education to schools to work on mental health, have mental health services available in schools.
Can I just
Sure,
break
go
in
ahead.
just- Because I asked
Yeah.
you a little bit about this.
Yeah, she
There
knows more than I do.
There
about
actually
that.
has been a grant that came to the state of Texas and then has been distributed and to the districts. And last year, I think it was last school year, we hired a director of social and emotional health in our district. And so her main focus is helping with the mental health of the
Yeah, I
students
think
and the
what
teachers.
she's talking about is in the schools.
Right.
Is that?
So,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
so the plan before COVID, the plan was
The
to kind of.
access, I mean, and also the students know there's someone besides just their normal counselor.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they're not all, I mean, they can't sit there
You
and,
know, there's some community centers that I'm aware of, through, when we were talking about the
Mhm.
Western
Yeah,
program,
right.
have been able to develop clinics in schools, in some certain ISDs. I'm aware of several of it, like in Austin and Round Rock and some of those, that actually have community mental health, an MHR center that has a clinic and it's just for, and it's
Like a school nurse with a mental health clinic?
yes, and it's built into the school. And it's separate, but it's part of kind of a partnership with it. And it received, the funding was, there was some funding for it. And that's the way they chose to go. Those have been, my understanding has been very successful. I wish we could do more things like that.
And NAMI is also.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, you're fine.
We're all interrupting you, sorry. But
Y'all
NAMI is
know
also.
more about that. I mean, I'm all in favor of it.
I guess, more of
Yeah,
a.
Yeah, no, that's what we think.
yeah.
NAMI is also trying to get into, NAMI in San Angelo is trying to get into the San Angelo schools as well and do some different presentations and stuff. But again, with COVID, we're not able to get in. But that's been it's been on our agenda for a year.
That hits me hard.
Well, and suicide rates and all those sorts of things. Yep.
We just had another question.
Okay.
Yeah, I have one last question. I'm gonna try to phrase it so people understand, but, I'd like your views on long-term care insurance and more, the reason I'm asking is that I realize, I see today that like state hospitals aren't accepting, people with chronic conditions who require long-term care, and mental, illness people, and, they're more like drive-throughs, and I guess long-term care is also an issue for everyone. And I'd like to know your views on how we can solve that type of issue.
Are you asking about long-term care in the mental health context or like in age, Alzheimer's care?
Yeah, people like who are older, with schizophrenia, with
Yeah.
things that nature, where state hospitals aren't taking them in for the remainder of their lives. I mean, I'm not sure how that
Yeah, and
what can be done there.
I probably can't speak to the state hospital component of that. It's a huge issue for our aging population. Long-term care insurance, to my knowledge, is exclusively a private insurance thing right now, so you have to pay for the insurance, and it can be quite expensive.
My parents,
yeah.
they just recently died,
Mhm.
but we tried to get, and for each of them, it would have been like $900 a month
Yep.
for long-term.
For the insurance?
And it's
Yeah,
just not
yeah.
reasonable.
Yeah, it's very high, and it's because most of the healthcare dollars you spend on an individual are spent on at the end of life. When you're young and healthy, you don't need it so much, and it's all comes at the end, and that's where the high cost comes, and that's where the high cost of the insurance comes. Unless we're willing to do some sort of federal funding of long-term care insurance, I don't see that changing anytime soon. And we're really not even able to get the healthcare taken care of, so we kind of have to start with that. But there are programs, Medicare, Medicaid, VA, and there are other benefits that do provide those in certain circumstances, but not for everybody. And I know it is very difficult, and the care can be very expensive. I don't have an answer for you. as to how we can deal with that. I mean, I'd love to talk about it, but
Well, remember this when you go to Congress.
yeah, that's right. That's right. I
One more thing to add to it.
Whenever she says Ruben has another question, I go, oh boy.
So do we.
Here's gonna be another tough question.
He's a tough
It's a
cookie.
good thing.
It's a good thing, yeah.
It's a very good question, and I wish I had an answer. One of the things I think that we could work towards, if we can work towards some issue of universal health care, and in whatever shape that may be, so that we know that everyone is covered for a basic level of care, that will go a long way towards assisting in that, because one of the things that you have is part of our high costs in care, and not just in respite care, but in health care in general, is people aren't getting care as they're younger that can alleviate and address some of those issues. And so particularly as you get into issues of dementia and things, the earlier interventions, sometimes there are things that doctors can do to slow that process and give you a longer life outside of care, and things of that nature. But people don't go because they can't afford it. And then you're in a nursing home and under Medicaid and not in very good situations. And there's a lot of things that can be studied about some of the requirements that you have to get on Medicaid for nursing home. Basically you have to be dirt poor to be able to do it. And sometimes you have people that have significant assets in an estate, and they have to basically sell it all or get rid of it all, spend it all on health care until they are poor and there's nothing left.
Or sign it over to the state.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things with Miller trusts and things like that can be worked on. There's ways to work within that system, and but you almost have to have an elder care lawyer who specializes in that to deal with it. So.
I'm on Medicare Medicaid, and I'm afraid to die. Why? Because I have no life insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Why do I not have life insurance? Because Medicare and Medicaid have told me that if I have any type of life insurance, at the end of my passing, they will take that away from me.
Yeah.
And they will not have anything to bury me with.
Yeah.
Is there any way we can go past that, or?
Well, you should be able. I would think we could do something, particularly burial expenses and things of that nature. There ought to be a way we can exempt things like that. I think what they're trying to do there is people aren't cheating the system. Medicaid's paying for it while they're accumulating all this wealth to go to somebody else. So instead of paying for their own care. So, but there ought to be something with waivers, particularly on things for minimal amounts of insurance. I think we might do something.
I have a curiosity question. It's a curiosity.
Okay.
What is the process, and I've seen shows on this, of being able to actually see the president in his own office? What is the process of that?
Can't be done unless you got a magic key. That's it's kind of ironic, because for so much of our history, any citizen could walk into the White House off the street and ask to see the president if he was available, for a long time. Of course, times become complicated, assassinations and security issues, and you've got to go through the right people to get access to the president these days.
Your congressman is one
Be
that
able
can
to
do
get
it.
nomination for something like that. Yeah, because I heard it took like a 6 months advance or something like that.
To get to the White House?
Yeah, to get to the White House or something like that, because one time, and this was just a one-time deal, I think. I don't know if I can do it again, but I actually did take a vacation in Washington D.C. at one time, and I took a tour around the White House and stuff like that, so.
Yeah.
That's also why I asked them.
Yeah.
Sort of question.
Yeah, it's happened before, but very, very seldom. Of course, the presidents most presidents' calendars are so full, it's hard to even, they're going from one thing to another all day long.
So I guess I'd have to talk to quite a few congressmen.
Yeah, you'd have to talk to your
You'd have to grease a few
congressmen, your
palms.
senators, and try to worm your way in there if you really actually, that or you gotta be a millionaire.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say, that's back
Good
in the
Yeah,
information,
then they'll
yeah.
be more entitled, which is unfortunate, but yeah.
Right, well, I know Mr. Hogg has a lot going on, so does anybody else have any final words, final questions?
I just want to say thank you on behalf of the members of the clubhouse.
Thank you, it's
for
my honor to be
taking
here.
the time to be here with us and discussing some of the topics, and we appreciate you and we wish you all the luck.
Yes, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be
Very
here.
appreciative that you're here.
Yeah, great questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Especially you,
Thank
Ruben.
for reminding me.
And then just one more thing, so last Saturday was, October 10th was Mental
Mhm.
Health Awareness Day. And so as part of the Texas Clubhouse initiative, Texas Clubhouse Rocks, we all donated or decorated rocks. And so we wanted to give you a rock. This one
Oh,
says
right.
no mental health without physical health. And then our hashtag Angelo Clubhouse and hashtag Clubhouse Texas Rocks.
All
So-
right, thank you
So
very
thank you all,
much.
thank you
That's
so much for
awesome.
coming, and we hope you keep that as a reminder
Oh,
of
it
the
is.
clubhouse and of
I will.
mental health.
I'll come back.
Awesome.
I'll come
And if
back.
you have time, we'd love to give you a tour.
Yes,
but-
I would love that.
Oh, okay, good. I wasn't sure how pressed you were for time. I know you're a busy
I am
man
a-
these
I am
days.